Imagine a place where every door is steel, every window is a slot, every sound is monitored, every movement controlled. A place where the most dangerous prisoners in the world live in near total silence, locked down 23 hours a day. This isn't a scene from a dystopian movie. It's real, and it's called the Supermax. Supermax prisons are the apex of incarceration. Designed for control, isolation, and permanence, they hold terrorists, cartel leaders, gang bosses, and inmates considered too dangerous to manage anywhere else. But their origins and their impact are as controversial as the walls that contain them. In this documentary, we'll uncover why Supermax prisons exist, how they were designed, and what life is really like inside them. We'll trace their rise from violent prison riots in the 1980s to the high-tech isolation cells of today. And we'll explore the hidden costs, psychological, social, and moral, of a system built to bury people alive. Stay until the end for a chilling case. The story of an inmate whose letters from inside a Supermax shook the very foundations of America's prison system. This is why Supermax prisons exist and how they're designed. The riot that changed everything. The seeds of the Supermax were planted in blood. On February 2, 1980, the New Mexico State Penitentiary erupted into one of the most violent prison riots in U.S. history. In just 36 hours, 33 inmates were killed, many tortured in gruesome ways. Guards were taken hostage. Cell doors were melted open with blowtorches. The prison descended into a nightmare of chaos and savagery. Investigators and the public were stunned. If prisons could not contain violence inside their walls, what could? The riot exposed the system's limits. Overcrowding, poor management, and unchecked gang influence created conditions where control was impossible. In the aftermath, corrections officials across the nation concluded that a new kind of prison was needed. A place designed not for rehabilitation, but for total control. This thinking birthed the Supermax concept. Facilities where problem inmates could be isolated, cut off from gangs, riots, and influence. It was a radical shift. Prisons within prisons, designed for the most disruptive men. The New Mexico riot wasn't the only spark. Throughout the 1980s, prison violence surged nationwide. At Marion, Illinois, 2 guards were murdered by the Aryan Brotherhood in 1983. The solution wasn't reform. It was containment through design. And so, America began building a new architecture of punishment. One cell, one door, one silence at a time. From Marion to Florence, the birth of the modern Supermax. After the carnage of the New Mexico riot, prison officials searched for solutio, and their eyes turned to USP Marion in Illinois, once a standard high-security prison, until October 22, 1983, when 2 correctional officers, Merle Klutz and Robert Hoffman, were brutally murdered by Aryan Brotherhood members. The double killing sent shockwaves through the federal system. The response was immediate and historic. Marion was placed on permanent lockdown. For the first time, a U.S. prison operated under conditions of 23-hour-a-day cell confinement. Inmates were allowed out only for showers or tightly controlled exercise. Programs, jobs, and social interaction disappeared. It was, in effect, America's first operational Supermax. What was meant as a temporary emergency measure became a model. Officials noticed that violence at Marion dropped sharply under permanent lockdown. To many, it proved that control through isolation worked. But the Marion experiment raised ethical alarms. Advocates argued that indefinite isolation was psychological torture. Inmates developed severe depression, paranoia, and psychosis. Lawsuits began to pile up. Yet, rather than scaling back, the federal government doubled down. By the early 1990s, the Federal Bureau of Prisons approved construction of a purpose-built facility in Florence, Colorado. The United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility, ADX Florence, opened in 1994, was unlike anything America had seen. It was not an improvised lockdown. It was a fortress designed from the ground up to isolate, monitor, and control. Known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies, it became the template for modern Supermax facilities nationwide. From the ashes of Marion, the Supermax era had officially begun. Architects of control, how these prisons are designed. Supermax prisons are not just buildings. They are machines of control. Every brick, window, and hallway is designed with one goal: to eliminate risk. Cells are small, about 7 by 12 feet. Each has a solid concrete bed, a combination sink toilet, and a narrow slit window angled to prevent even a view of the sky. Food is delivered through slots. Showers are controlled electronically. Movement is reduced to near zero. At ADX Florence, there are multiple layers of security. Perimeter fences laced with motion sensors. Gun towers with 24/7 surveillance. Remote-operated steel doors that can be locked or opened at the push of a button. Pod designs where a single guard can oversee multiple cells without direct contact. Even exercise is controlled. Inmates are escorted, shackled hand and foot, to small outdoor cages known as dog runs, surrounded by concrete. They can glimpse only a sliver of the sky. Every detail has been engineered to reduce human unpredictability. No blind spots, no large gatherings, no chance encounters. The architecture itself becomes a form of discipline. Critics argue this design is less about safety and more about erasing human contact. One psychologist described it bluntly: the cell becomes the coffin you live in. For prison officials, however, the design is essential. Inmates housed at Supermax are considered leaders of gangs, organizers of riots, or repeat escapees. To them, these prisons are not punishment. They are containment. Life inside the box. 23 hours a day in isolation. What does daily life look like inside a Supermax? For most inmates, it means 23 hours a day in total isolation. The cell is the universe, 7 feet wide, 12 feet long, with concrete walls and a narrow window angled so you cannot see outside. Meals are delivered through a slot. Human contact is reduced to brief exchanges with guards, often no more than a few words. Narration. The daily schedule is rigid. Wake up to lights automatically flicked on. Breakfast slid through the door. A few hours later, another tray for lunch. The afternoon is spent alone, reading, writing, or staring at walls. Dinner arrives early, often before 5 p.m. By 9 p.m., lights dim, leaving only the hum of ventilation. Recreation come, as once a day, if approved. Inmates are shackled, escorted down narrow corridors, and placed in small outdoor pens, known as dog runs. These cages allow a brief hour of fresh air, but no contact with other people. Phone calls are rare. Visits are heavily restricted and conducted through thick glass. Family contact dwindles until, for many, it vanishes completely. Former ADX inmate Thomas Silverstein once described life there as a slow-motion death sentence. Another prisoner said, "It's not living, it's just existing." Isolation is the defining feature. For officials, it ensures security. For inmates, it strips away identity. Time loses meaning. Days blur together. Without stimulation, the mind begins to unravel. Life in the box is the ultimate contradiction. Total safety for staff, total silence for prisoners, and a lingering question for society. Is this justice, or something closer to torture? Who gets sent to Supermax, and why? Supermax prisons are not for every inmate. They are reserved for those the system labels the worst of the worst. But who decides that? And on what grounds? At ADX Florence, the population includes domestic terrorists like Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, foreign terrorists like Zacarias Moussaoui, the so-called 20th hijacker of 9/11, cartel leaders, and high-ranking members of prison gangs like the Aryan Brotherhood and Mexican Mafia. But not everyone at Supermax is infamous. Some arrive because they killed staff in other prisons. Others are escape artists. And some are gang leaders who continue to run operations from behind bars, ordering murders and riots. The Bureau of Prisons uses a classification system. Inmates may be sent to Supermax for threatening national security, terrorists, threatening prison security, gang leaders, violent disruptors, chronic escape risk, retaliation management, after attacking staff. Transfers are not always transparent. Critics argue some inmates are sent for political reasons or for lawsuits against prison authorities. Once inside, the path out is unclear. Many prisoners remain in Supermax indefinitely. For prison officials, Supermax is a tool of last resort, a pressure valve to contain the uncontrollable. For inmates, it is a black hole, a place where time and hope vanish. Psychological fallout. The human cost of total isolation. What happens to the mind when it's locked in a box, cut off from human contact for years? Psychologists who study solitary confinement describe devastating effects: anxiety, paranoia, hallucinations, memory loss, and suicidal thoughts. One psychiatrist called it social death. At ADX Florence, lawsuits filed by prisoners describe hearing voices, seeing shadows, and losing track of reality. In 2012, a federal lawsuit revealed multiple suicides and untreated mental illness. The Bureau of Prisons eventually agreed to reforms, but critics say the damage remains. Research backs these claims. Studies show that isolation longer than 15 days can cause lasting psychological harm. Yet many Supermax inmates spend years, even decades, in solitary. Former inmate Jack Powers, who spent 12 years in ADX, wrote, "It strips you down to nothing. You start talking to yourself. Then you realize there's no one left to answer." For officials, this is the price of control. For prisoners, it is a sentence beyond time. Punishment not just of the body, but of the mind. The cost of Supermax: billions for silence. Supermax prisons are often described as fortresses of control. But there's another side of the story: the price tag. ADX Florence alone cost nearly $60 million to build in the early 1990s, and its annual operating costs soar into the tens of millions. Each inmate costs far more to house than in general population. Estimates suggest a Supermax prisoner can cost 2 to 3 times more per year, primarily due to staffing, surveillance, and de-security technology. State systems face the same challenge. California's Pelican Bay, one of the first state-level Supermaxes, drains enormous resources. Staffing costs skyrocket because of the need for round-the-clock surveillance. Medical and transport costs also increase when inmates require outside care, since each hospital visit demands multiple armed escorts. Critics argue that the financial burden outweighs the benefits. With mass incarceration already costing the U.S. over $80 billion annually, Supermax facilities become symbols of expensive excess. Advocates of reform point to alternatives, like high-security but non-Supermax units, which could manage violent inmates without the crushing expense of total isolation. Yet for many policymakers, the fear of losing control outweighs the price. In the end, Supermax prisons are not just architectural statements. They are economic decisions. Choices to spend billions for silence. Legal battles. Is isolation torture? The rise of Supermax prisons sparked not only financial debates, but legal ones. The question: does long-term isolation amount to cruel and unusual punishment? Inmates across the country have filed lawsuits alleging violations of the Eighth Amendment. Their claims cite untreated mental illness, lack of medical care, and psychological torture. In 1995, the case of Madrid versus Gomez challenged conditions at California's Pelican Bay Supermax. The court found that, for mentally ill inmates, isolation constituted unconstitutional cruelty. It ordered reforms, but stopped short of declaring solitary confinement itself as torture. In Virginia, Porter v. Clark, 2019, ruled that indefinite solitary violated inmates' constitutional rights, forcing the state to revise policies. And at ADX Florence, lawsuits in the 2000s revealed alarming patterns of suicides and untreated psychiatric crises, leading to a 2012 settlement requiring improved care. International law adds another layer. The United Nations Mandela Rules declare that solitary confinement beyond 15 days constitutes torture. By that standard, America's decades-long Supermax confinements are clear violations. Yet the courts remain divided. Some judges defer to prison officials, citing safety and security. Others insist that isolation without meaningful human contact is a human rights abuse. The legal battle reveals a larger truth. Supermax prisons exist in a gray zone, legally sanctioned by the state, morally condemned by the world. The global view: how other nations use, or reject, Supermax. America is not alone in facing violent inmates, but it is nearly alone in embracing the Supermax model so extensively. In Norway, prisons like Halden prioritize rehabilitation over isolation. Even the most dangerous inmates live in communal units with education and therapy. Critics call it soft. Supporters say it reduces reoffending. In Brazil and Venezuela, chaos reigns. Overcrowding and gang dominance have made prisons more violent than the streets. In some cases, officials considered Supermax-style units, but corruption and funding shortfalls crippled progress. The United Kingdom has high-security units like Belmarsh and Whitemoor, but solitary confinement is used sparingly compared to the U.S. In Canada, a 2019 Supreme Court ruling declared indefinite segregation unconstitutional. The global view raises a profound question. Is the U.S. model of permanent isolation an outlier, or a warning? Where other nations see rehabilitation, America sees control. Where others scale back isolation, America builds more. Supermax prisons may be America's answer to chaos, but to much of the world, they look like a blueprint for cruelty. Famous inmates. Life at ADX Florence. If Supermax prisons are fortresses of silence, their residents are names that once dominated headlines. Inside ADX Florence, often called the Alcatraz of the Rockies, live some of the most infamous men in modern history. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, lived in ADX until his death. His homemade bombs killed 3 people and injured 23 during a nationwide terror campaign. At Florence, he was confined to a single cell, allowed out only for isolated exercise. He reportedly spent much of his time reading and writing letters, though no contact with other inmates was permitted. Then there's Zacarias Moussaoui, dubbed the 20th hijacker of the September 11th attacks. Convicted of conspiring with Al-Qaeda, Moussaoui spends life inside the walls of ADX. For officials, his confinement is not just punishment, but prevention, ensuring he has no means of communication with extremist networks. America builds more. Perhaps the most high-profile addition was Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, leader of Mexico's Sinaloa cartel. After multiple dramatic escapes from Mexican prisons, U.S. authorities ensured his final destination was escape-proof. At ADX, Guzman is cut off from his cartel empire. No tunnels, no bribes, just 4 walls and silence. But it's not only terrorists and cartel leaders. The prison also houses domestic extremists, like Eric Rudolph, the Olympic Park bomber, gang leaders like Aryan Brotherhood bosses, and spies convicted of betraying U.S. secrets. Life for these men is not defined by their crimes, but by the design of ADX. They live in the same concrete cubes, eat the same delivered meals, and stare at the same slit windows as every other inmate. Their notoriety ends at the door. Yet their presence underscores why Supermax prisons exist, to contain those deemed too dangerous, too violent, or too powerful to exist anywhere else. Escape-proof? Attempts to break out of Supermax. Supermax prisons are designed to be escape-proof. Every inch of ADX Florence is engineered to prevent flight. But has anyone ever tried? In 2001, inmate Richard Lee McNair, known for previous daring escapes, transferred to ADX after fleeing from other prisons. At Florence, his escape artistry met its match. McNair himself admitted in interviews that ADX was unbreakable. There's no way out of that place. Other inmates have fantasized about escape but found reality crushing. Multiple fences topped with razor wire, armed towers, electronic detection systems, and locked sally ports make every exit point a dead end. Even during hospital visits or court appearances, prisoners are shackled, handcuffed, and escorted by heavily armed teams. No confirmed escape has ever succeeded at ADX Florence. Attempts are either stopped early or never get off the ground. Compared to other prisons, where tunnels, bribes, or assaults on guards have enabled breakouts, ADX is closer to a vault than a correctional facility, and that is by design. After Guzman's escapes in Mexico, U.S. officials were clear. ADX was the only place he could be kept. In Florence, not even the most cunning or resourceful can break the machine. Supermax prisons were built on a promise. Not rehabilitation, not hope, but containment at any cost. The future. Will Supermax survive? As the years pass, the question grows louder. Should Supermax prisons continue to exist? Advocates of abolition argue that long-term isolation is torture. International human rights bodies, psychologists, and even some federal judges warn that indefinite solitary destroys the human mind. But prison officials counter that Supermax facilities are indispensable. Without them, gang leaders, terrorists, and violent offenders could destabilize entire prison systems. For many, the alternative is returning to riots, chaos, and bloodshed, like New Mexico in 1980. Reformers push for step-down programs, allowing inmates to earn their way out of solitary through good behavior. Others call for strict limits, no more than 15 days in isolation. Still others demand the total abolition of Supermaxes, pointing to countries like Norway as proof that high security can exist without extreme isolation. The future may not be abolition, but adaptation. Lawsuits, budget pressures, and public opinion are forcing small changes. More mental health units, more oversight, greater scrutiny. Yet one truth remains. As long as America insists on absolute control, Supermax prisons will remain its ultimate weapon, the box we built. Supermax prisons were born from violence. They were designed as machines of control, built on the belief that silence and isolation could guarantee safety. But behind their walls lies a paradox. In trying to contain chaos, America created a new form of punishment, one that tests the line between justice and cruelty. The Supermax is not just a prison. It is a mirror. It reflects how far a society will go to control its darkest fears and how much it is willing to sacrifice in the name of order. Thanks for watching Behind Bars TV. If this documentary opened your eyes, hit the like button and subscribe for more real stories from inside the world's toughest prisons. Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every one. Stay curious, stay informed, and we'll see you in the next episode.